Imagine with me a pleasant situation, like a friend calls you out of the blue and invites you to join them on a fantastic Caribbean vacation. What do you say? How do you feel? Picture yourself packing, beautiful blue skies, bright sandy beaches. You can almost feel the sea breeze. But now think of the other side of it, like how you're actually going to pull this off. You have to ask your boss for the time off. You have to scrounge the money out of savings. Who's going to watch the dog? Who's going to bring in the mail? I need to worry about getting a sunburn on the top of my head. Logan Airport. What's happening is in a fraction of a second, your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do and running through hundreds of scenarios, best and worst case. I call this the power of vicarious rehearsal, where we can mentally place ourselves in a scene before it happens. But what if I told you that you could use this to diffuse a stressful situation even before it occurs? In my line of work, we do this all the time because it can mean the difference between life and death. I'm the emergency management director for Tufts Medical Center, meaning I oversee the response for anything that threatens to disrupt the normal operations of our 415-bed academic medical center or any of the tens of thousands of people that come and go from our campus. Sure, we have documented plans and procedures to manage just about any emergency, but it's vicarious rehearsal, the synergy of imagination and action that allow us to take on the most demanding circumstances. In emergency management, there's a core difference between being taken by surprise and responding to the unexpected. See, reactions are emotional. Responses are logical. Reactions are reflexive. Responses are calculated. Reactions can spiral out of control, but responses follow plans. I'm here to tell you that if you intentionally imagine yourself in stressful situations, if you practice without the practice, then you can build the confidence and the capabilities to better respond. I landed my first job in healthcare when I was 18 years old. I was hired on the night shift to sit with patients. Now, these were patients that were altered mental status or highly combative. I think the hospital figured if I could last for 8 hours with these folks, it'd be okay to send a nurse in. But sometimes, my job was to sit with patients who were in the final stages of their life and had no friends or family. It was here where I met a patient who we'll call Rita. Rita was 94 years old, and she asked me to hold her. Now, as uneasy as my invincible 18-year-old self felt, I did. We sat there in silence, listening to her monitor beep. Now, Rita survived the night, although there were a couple of points where I wasn't sure I was going to. But when I left the hospital that morning, I thought, I needed to do something. I needed to somehow mentally prepare for the next night's work in case I was in that room. And see, I was a drama geek in high school and now in college. So I used an old theater exercise of getting into character, of stepping into the script to prepare for my next shift with Rita. I used the train ride into work to mentally set a tone and to get my game face on and to imagine how I would feel and what I would do and sometime around 3 a.m., Rita took her final breaths while her hand was interlocked with mine. All this was while my friends were working at Walgreens. Now, this was my first encounter with death, but it was through vicarious rehearsal, mentally placing myself in the scene before it happened, that I found the emotional strength to respond. You know, I learned 3 truths about myself that night that I believe hold true for all of us. And the first is, you're stronger than you think you are. I'm not just talking about your resiliency or your ability to recover. I'm talking about how much you can absorb. And 2, you are essential to someone. Could be anybody, family, friends, coworkers, could be a perfect stranger like Rita. But the truth is, I was there to provide the human contact that Rita so desperately needed at a time when it was critical. And 3, you are absolutely going to find yourself in events which are beyond your ability to change. But what's important is that you accept that and you adapt in the moment. Years later, as an EMT, I would use this same tactic in the ambulance with my partner. We'd be on the way to a call saying things like, this sounds like an allergic reaction, or what if the patient starts having chest pain? We would rehearse in our minds and then verbalize out loud to better treat the patient. It wasn't until I got to grad school and the professor threw a slide up on the board that said, vicarious rehearsal, mentally placing yourself in the scene. I said, this is real? Not only is it real, it's used by Navy SEALs to prepare for sights and sound of war. It's used by Olympic athletes to visualize the win. So now, as the head of emergency management, I thought, we can use this to train healthcare workers. We could prepare doctors and nurses for the kinds of disasters that aren't taught in med school, things like mass casualty incidents and fire safety. Now, when I talk about disaster response and healthcare preparedness in this city, I know that there's a day that we all think of. And so I will attest to you firsthand that the power of vicarious rehearsal was no more evident than in the response to the Boston Marathon. Now, what you should know about Marathon Monday is all hospitals ramp up. In fact, it's one of 4 days in which we proactively trigger our emergency operations plan. The others being 4th of July, New Year's Eve, and because this is the city of Boston, St. Patrick's Day. Now, Patriots Day is a day of pride in this city, a day where we celebrate forward thinkers like Sam Adams and Paul Revere, who incidentally founded Tufts Medical Center. They built my office. Without them, sure, we wouldn't have a country, but I wouldn't have a job. So the best words to describe that, to be in this room with all of you today, is wicked pissa. Anyway, Patriots Day is also a day of pride for my organization. We're the closest hospital to the finish line. Emergency management directors like me oversee the logistics and the ED on those days. So I was standing at the nurses' station when the call came through on the city's disaster radio shortly after 2:53 p.m. Now, anybody that's ever worked in an emergency department knows there's a natural controlled chaos, hustle and bustle, beeps and buzzes. But we know when we hear the sounds of that radio, we need to pause and we need to pay attention. And the message was, attention Boston hospitals. Reports of multiple explosions at the Boston Marathon finish line. Prepare for mass casualties. There's a second where we can almost hear each other breathe. In my head, I think, who do I know running this race? I think of my colleagues, my friends at the finish line. And then something in my head says, you're stronger than you think you are. Days like this are what you've trained for. One of our seasoned charge nurses shouts, Rob, is this one of your crazy drills? And I'm back. No, this is real. Huddle up. There's a saying in emergency response that your first 5 minutes will dictate your next 5 hours. And so our discussion quickly became, we don't know what this is, but we know to expect the worst. You've been through this multiple times in exercises and in your mind. And so we're going to do the same thing that we do every day, and that's the very best for those patients that are about to roll through those doors, because this is a time in their lives when we are essential to them. And that's what we did. For the next 2 intense hours, our medical staff treated patients with life-altering, horrendous injuries. As the most acute patients were upstairs in the operating room, and we started to de-escalate emergency operations from my command center, at 4:49 p.m., a suspicious package was discovered, and law enforcement forced us to evacuate. ER techs grabbed linen carts, security guards grabbed extra oxygen tanks, finance and research workers appeared in corners saying, what do you need? Hospital executives rolled up their sleeves and got dirty. Healthcare heroes wheeled patients to safety through those very halls that I walked through to meet Rita so many nights before. The staff at Tufts Medical Center cleared out the ED of our level 1 trauma center in about 3 minutes. Later on that night, when I finally had the chance to shut the lights off in my command center, and the hospital and the city started to return to the new normal, that same charge nurse who asked me if it was an exercise, she finds me and says, you know, Rob, I felt that because you made us go through all that mental preparation, I was ready. See, here's the thing. Law enforcement made us evacuate using a different route than we had ever practiced. So later on, when I asked the staff why everything could be so streamlined, the answers were consistent. One ER tech said, Rob, I was in the zone, dude. Another nurse said, I knew what needed to be done, so it didn't matter what the plan was. And finally, somebody said, it was like I could think clearly. It was like I could think clearly. What makes trauma so traumatic is not the injury, it's loss of control. If we stimulate our brains beforehand to adapt to the scenario, we can maintain situational awareness so that the event doesn't control us. So right now you're thinking, okay, Rob, we get it, vicarious rehearsal. What's it mean for me? How can this help me in my everyday life? Check this out. I have a buddy that works right over here at City Hall. He works for a pretty prominent politician, and sometimes he has to stand in for the boss. Before a big meeting, yeah, he thinks about what he's going to say and the different sort of things people are going to say to him. But he also thinks about how he's going to feel sitting at the head of that table. Before he has to talk to the media, he thinks about the difficult questions he's going to be asked. But he also thinks about what it's going to feel like underneath the lights, standing in front of the microphones. He imagines how his voice is going to sound if he's a little nervous. He imagines his palms being sweaty, kind of like mine are right now. Let's say you have to have a difficult conversation with a family member. If you think about what you're going to say in advance and how you're going to feel if it doesn't go well, you can avoid saying something you might regret. And at work, those projects that your boss wants done yesterday aren't as intimidating if you break them down into smaller, achievable targets. See, stress is a product of emotion. I'm not saying that we can eliminate stress altogether, but rather by preconceiving ourselves in that uncomfortable moment, we can become less vulnerable to stress. Let's do one together. Think of a stressful situation in your own life. Now, don't think of the same stressful situation as the person next to you. But really imagine yourself in it. Think of the different ways it can go, in your favor or not. Think of the physical environment. Think of how you're going to feel in the room. Sights, sounds, smells. Think about what you expect to happen, but especially think about your biggest challenge. When you start to feel a little anxious, that means it's working. Think about taking the thing that you have to do and breaking it down into smaller, achievable targets. When you feel your heart start to beat faster and the blood rush to your cheeks, it means that vicarious rehearsal is helping you get into character. Except the character is you. When you start to feel the butterflies in your stomach, that's good because it means your brain is training your body. So that when you encounter it for real, your brain's going to say, hang on a second, I've seen this before. Your body is going to say, I've done this before. This isn't that scary. It's your rehearsal of these smaller crises that make you more prepared for the larger ones. Fear, it's terrifying. It can make us sad. Embrace that. Because imagination plus action and the safety of our own minds helps us overcome it. You're training your brains to become more comfortable with the challenge while training your bodies to carry out the necessary action. You're training yourself to take those butterflies and all that nervous energy and transform it into beautiful fuel for your success. You're practicing without the practice. Use vicarious rehearsal to teach yourself to respond and not react. Use vicarious rehearsal to diffuse a stressful situation even before you encounter it. To overcome a fear, to meet your deadline, or to carry out those difficult conversations. But mostly, use vicarious rehearsal to become more emotionally prepared. Because you're stronger than you think you are. Because you can adapt to any changing moment. And because all of us, at some point in our lives, are going to be called upon to spend a night holding Rita's hand. Thank you.